You're listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again with another amazing show lined up for y'all today. Man, today we have a special guest, and I have a great honor to introduce to y'all Dan McMillan. He is the founder and executive director of Save Democracy in America. And Dan is a writer based in New York City, holding a Ph.D. in German history and from Columbia University and a law degree from Fordham. He has worked as a book editor, history professor, and a prosecuting attorney. In 2014, Dan published an acclaimed book, How Could This Happen? Explain the Holocaust, which explores the reasons behind the Holocaust in an engaging journalistic style. Leaving his job at Brooklyn's DA's office, Dan became a writer and later established Save Democracy in America to advocate for direct political action. We're going to learn a lot from Dan today. But first and foremost, I want to welcome him to the show and say, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Shemaya. Thank you so much for that gracious introduction. It's really good to be with you.
Man, I appreciate you taking your time, man, because I know you're traveling as well, doing big things. So I appreciate you taking time to talk to us,
Well, I appreciate you giving me the chance to get our ideas before the American people, because I think what we have ultimately is some good news about politics, which is pretty hard to find these days.
Right. Yeah. And speaking of that, let's start out kind of explain to people what is Save Democracy in America, because people can go to the website savedemocracyinamerica.org, but kind of give us a little backstory how this was formed.
So it actually started while I was finishing up my book on the Holocaust. I started researching and writing what I was planning to be a book about the problem of money in politics, because with elections, I mean, this was already a problem back in the late 1980s, but it really has escalated dramatically in the last 10, 12 years. Basically, our government is for sale to high-dollar campaign donors, and this is not government by the people. Elections have got so expensive that fundraising, especially for a politician who holds federal office, like in the Congress or the White House, fundraising is arguably the most important part of their job. It's what they really most have to be good at. And so I worked on this and did a lot of research, and I learned a lot and studied different approaches to fixing the problem, and finally decided in the spring of 2020 that all kinds of people had written great books about money in politics, and the books hadn't moved the needle, and I decided to bite the bullet and become active in politics for work for direct advocacy. I founded my organization, and it has one purpose. It's we are strictly nonpartisan, and our goal is to build support among voters, among Americans of all political stripes on both sides of the aisle, for voter-owned elections, also known as democracy dollars. Democracy dollars is one term for the concept. And the concept is wonderfully straightforward, given that the only people now who really have any influence in Washington anymore are, heavy campaign donors. We need to make ourselves the donors. And so the way this would work in practice is that for every 2-year federal election cycle, the government would give every registered voter an online account of campaign cash. You can't take the money out and spend it, but you go online and assign it to the candidates you want to support. And if you put enough money into this system, any capable candidate who really wants to serve us, instead of serving big oil or big pharma, can get enough money from the voters to run a competitive campaign. And their opponent's not going to have much excuse for taking money from billionaires and special interests. And so having studied different approaches to reform, I think this is by far the most effective and also the simplest, which I think is part of what makes it good, easiest to implement, step we can take to start putting the American people back in the driver's seat the way it's supposed to be in our Constitution.
And when people want to learn more about the organization, you have videos that they can watch, and it kind of goes over what you just explained to us about how Save Democracy in America actually works and the dollars work. And for someone who's freshly into politics and they don't know too much about the whole system, are there other additional resources that people can read to be educated more on, politics in America and how that plays a role with your organization?
Well, I think if you want to get a handle, there are a number of organizations that really that do good research on money in politics. Maybe the best is there's a website called Open Secrets, and what they do is research on money in politics. And you can go into that website and type in the name of your representative in in the House or your senator, and they will show you like basically who owns that senator, who owns that rep, where are they getting their money in the last election. They provide a lot of other information as well. That's a good place to follow it. I like to think that I address many parts of this issue in some of the media interviews that are on my website. The website is, I think a good place to start because there's a basic explanation and some FAQs, and it's the URL is unfortunately long. It's savedemocracyinamerica.org, savedemocracyinamerica.org. If you feel like probably as far as books on money in politics, probably the best is called Dark Money. It's by Jane Mayer, who writes for The New Yorker. And it's about the Koch brothers, which are these two, one of them has now passed away, two sort of oil and gas billionaires who have this whole secretive network of donors whose names they were able to keep from the public and to have an enormous amount of influence in our politics. And that's probably the best single book written about money in politics, and it reads like a novel. It's a terrific read.
Once again, we're talking to our special guest today, Dan McMillan. You go to his website, savedemocracyinamerica.org. And when it comes to the opportunity for people to learn about the milestones that SDIA, I can do that for short, has achieved in its efforts to promote democracy dollars and to restore government by the people, are there any notable examples of bipartisan support or engagement?
Office holders of either party really can't lead on this issue because they're all too dependent on their donors. But this concept has already been established for city elections, for municipal elections in Seattle. Was first used in 2017 and has been used very effectively. There was also by ballot initiative. It was passed in Oakland, California last fall. Those are, I guess, the two sort of most concrete wins that we managed to notch. I'm currently partnering with a great organization in New Hampshire called Open Democracy, and we're working together to promote not only a bill for a voter-owned elections, or democracy dollars, as we call them, for state elections in New Hampshire, but also to promote the federal system, which has been my main focus. Part of the calculation there, the strategy, is that if we can win over enough New Hampshire voters on both sides of the aisle by 2027, and they're ready to say to candidates in the next presidential cycle, we're really fed up with our government being for sale. I want my country back. I want voter-owned elections. I want to say, if enough, voters in New Hampshire are saying that, then the national media are going to have to talk about it, and the candidates are going to have to talk about it. One of the obstacles we face is that, the candidates don't want to talk about the fact that they have to sell themselves to all these campaign donors. It's not a winning slogan at election time. You don't say to the voters when you're running for office, look, folks, I'll do my best to get you some crumbs from the table, but, my donors come first. Those are the people I take care of. And for the national media, political advertising is such a big profit center. So, I would say that our movement, our effort is still in an early stage. On the other hand, we've notched these two, wins in cities. Also, we have proof of concept. It's been tested in Seattle through several election cycles, and it's worked very well. It was part of an election reform bill in Minnesota this term, but they ended up stripping it out of the bill. I'm optimistic about our effort in New Hampshire this year. I think already for this presidential primary, we may be able to build enough support to really start getting the word out more effectively.
And for the individual that's listening to this right now and listening to your voice, what's some of the specific actions that they can take on themselves to not just support the mission of SDIA, but also just spread the news to other individuals who can benefit from that information?
Shemaiah, I think you put your finger on it exactly, is to spread the word, is to, if what I'm saying makes sense to you, or at least is interesting enough to check it out, go to our website. There's a couple of short videos that kind of repeat what I've said here that explain the concept, and then share the videos or our website, on your social media accounts, and also more directly, email them to friends of yours and talks to friends, to relatives, to coworkers about this. Because, the idea itself, we're pretty sure that the idea itself is kind of a winner, because we feel that, well, not just feel, I think it seems clear to me at least, that the American people on both sides of the aisle, Americans have been pretty fed up for a long time with politics. I think most of us feel our government doesn't represent us, doesn't serve us. Americans have been saying they want change for quite some time. But no one in politics, no one in Washington has shown us how we get to change, because what we most need to change is money in politics. And they're all trapped in that system. They're too dependent on their donors. So I think that the idea itself there's two things about it that I think are really make it a winner politically. One is just simplicity, that it's common sense. Whoever pays the piper calls the tune. If we, the people, want to call the tune in Washington and in the State House, we got to pay the piper. We got to, fund the system that pays for election campaigns. And the other is the way that this system directly empowers each and every voter. I mean, right now, one of the things that I keep encountering is so many Americans who just feel no one's listening in Washington. They feel powerless. They're discouraged. And understandably, because you go to the polls and vote, and it still makes sense to vote. Your vote has some impact, but it doesn't count for anywhere near as much as it should, because ultimately the donors really determine what happens after the vote. They steal a lot of the value of your vote. And this way, what we're saying is, look, money is power in American politics. So that being the case, here is your $100 of power in a presidential year. Use as you see fit. And candidates are going to have to come to you, not just to ask you for your vote, but they're going to have to ask you for something they need a lot more than your vote. And that is the campaign cash, without which they can't run a credible campaign. They can't ask anyone for their vote. So anyway, I'm taking a little too long to get to the point. But what I guess I'm saying is that I think we've got an idea that's a winner, that speaks to, every American, most Americans' discontent. It's an idea that we're getting support on both sides of the aisle. This is not really this is beyond party. This is about government by the people, which is one of the ideals that our country is supposed to stand for. And what we need is validation. What we need is for people, people in our audience, listen to this, to help us overcome that feeling that so many Americans have that we're defeated, that we're powerless, that the system is too corrupt to fix. And so the thing is, I go on radio, Shemaiah, I go on television sometimes, I speak in person, I make my best case. I try to be persuasive, and I believe in this very passionately. But the people in our audience, they don't know me from Adam. But I say to everyone in the audience, if this idea makes sense to you and you're willing to tell the people who know you and trust you that you think this is a good idea, or at least that our website is worth checking out, that it's interesting enough to check out, well, the message that I'm delivering about how we get money out of politics is 100 times more powerful to those people coming from you than it's ever going to be coming from me. So I think that's the single most important thing that I want people to do is, listen, go check out our website, see if the plan makes sense to you, see if this seems like a common sense plan as we think it is. And if so, then spread the word. And I think I think so many Americans are so pessimistic, and a lot of people feel beaten down by politics. I feel like we've got a message of unity, that we're all Americans, we're all in this together. We're all getting stiffed by the political system. We're all being not represented by our government. And again, this is kind of about one of the ideals that, for me, the country is always supposed to stand for, government by the people. So I'm sorry, I've been going on so long, I haven't let you get a word in edgewise.
No, you're perfect, man. This is perfect. And by the way, listen to Army Focus Radio, talking to the founder and executive director of Save Democracy in America, Dan McMillan. You can go to the website, savedemocracyinamerica.org. And you mentioned the system, and yeah, I think that's a great point, because when you look at the candidates who are running for office, in what ways do you think that democracy dollars would affect how they run their strategy in running for office?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is they start listening to us instead of to these high dollar donors. In a way, they're going to keep listening to their donors, but right now they listen to this small minority of Americans who can give money in big bulk. But when you get the system that we propose, vote where basically the voters own the elections, then they're going to have to start reaching out to the voters, listening to the voters. Right now, we're just kind of a necessary evil. We're a nuisance to them. They need our votes to get into office, but what the people who really count are their donors. But when we become the donors, then we count. And then I think we get a second thing, we get candidates who are more interested in serving us. I think we get a better quality candidates. Right now, you almost have to be a millionaire to run for Congress, and that's a narrow talent pool. But with this, with voter-owned elections, with democracy dollars system, all kinds of people can, of many different walks of life, can. You don't need to be a millionaire to have seed money for your campaign. If you've got a good idea and you communicate well and you've got the gumption to lead, you can knock on some doors, start getting some of this money, and we can start seeing, we can see school teachers or police officers or school principals or, nurses, sort of have a Congress and have state legislatures that are more representative of the whole country and in different communities of our country. And that's also makes it more representative. I think the other thing is that with this system, it'll become possible to get things done in Washington again. And what I mean by that is right now, we got a system where, because the hunger for money is so desperate from these politicians, that for every good idea that anyone's got for fixing the country's problems, there's going to be a group of donors who can block it, because all these members of Congress and whoever's in the White House doesn't want to alienate any potential donor. To make it a little more concrete, for example, Shemai, Americans pay twice as much for prescription medicine as Germans or Canadians or New Zealanders or really the citizens of any of the other wealthy countries that are our friends and allies. And that's because we're the only country where the government doesn't regulate the price of medicines. It's so expensive that a lot of Americans go bankrupt. If you're unlucky and you get a certain kind of cancer and there's a new expensive drug that causes $5,000 a month, you can spend yourself into bankruptcy trying to stay alive. In a poll that I saw, and this was 2019, it was before the pandemic, and I'm sure it's worse now, a quarter of Americans said they had not taken some medicine their doctor had prescribed for them in the previous year because they couldn't afford it, which is crazy. And right now we can't change that. In fact, I don't even hear candidates on either side even making noises about regulating the price of medicine because basically big pharma, year in and year out, these drug manufacturers are some of the biggest donors. They got Congress in their pocket. So that's just sort of one example. That's kind of an example of how, we could get more affordable health care and medication that Americans can afford, but we can't get there because the donors will block it. But when we're the donors, then we can have a real conversation about what's in the best interest of all of us, not just what is best for the executives at Pfizer or Merck or any one of these big companies. Let me stop and see if you have any questions, and then I can give some other examples of how things can get better with this.
Yeah, because a follow-up question is when it comes to any potential challenges when it comes to implementing democracy dollars, how do you think researchers or policymakers would want to address these concerns in order to ensure that its effectiveness and integrity?
So the effectiveness of the system. Well, one of the great things about this, I think, is that it's almost, I think this is going to your question, I think it's almost impossible for the government to mess up, and I think it's impossible for politicians to rig. You've got you've heard probably of some other sort of public financing mechanisms that are kind of on the same theory where the government will give matching funds. Like if you get a small dollar donation of 100, the government will give the candidate another 700. And the people who've worked for those systems are fighting the good fight, and I think they've made some progress. But the problem is that sort of formula, incumbents can kind of rig it to their own advantage. But the thing about this system, about voter-owned elections, is that the government does almost nothing. All the government does is set up the national website where every registered voter will have where their accounts will live, and also print up some paper vouchers for, democracy dollars for Americans who don't have access to a computer or don't like computers. But then the voters take it from there. I mean, the decision, the really important decision, which candidates get money, which don't, that's tossed decentralized to 168 million registered voters. I don't see how you can rig that. I don't see how you can corrupt that. So, as far as, again, I guess if your question is sort of how do we make this happen, ultimately, Washington's not going to give it to us. We, the people, have got to demand it. But I think that once we get the word out widely enough, that we will be able to get enough Americans to see the value of it and demand it. Because I think Americans are ready for change. And I think Americans, in fact, feel that change is overdue. The political system is getting even more dysfunctional. I think actually the chances are odds of fundamental change to the system, transforming the system, which really I think this is what this would do, I think are a lot better now than they were 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. I think now is kind of really maybe the best possible point in our history to make this happen.
Once again, listen on Refocus Radio, talking to the founder and executive director of Save Democracy in America, Dan McMillan. And you can go visit his website, savedemocracyinamerica.org. And my final question for you, it kind of ties everything all together full circle.
Yes.
When looking ahead, what's the long-term goal and aspiration that you have for SDIA and how you envision the future with the influence of empowering people to not just learn more about the political system, but understand that they can use their voice to bring change?
I think the future, I see a really bright future for our country, Shemaiah, because I mean, what we're aiming for is that we build enough support to make this reform happen for federal elections, and also along the way, probably we'll notch some state wins and some more local wins before we get to the federal system. Maybe we may get a state system in New Hampshire before we get the federal system, for example. But once we do that, then Americans are going to, I think voters are going to be more engaged in politics because they're going to see that they have power. They're going to be better informed. And the thing is, a lot of the people who kind of supposedly run this country, they seem to have forgotten that government by the people works and nothing else does. And you look at periods of our history when the American people really were in the driver's seat, and I'm thinking like, mid 1930s to mid 1960s. Now we were far from, it wasn't government by all the people because, as you know, Black people in the South were not allowed to vote and ran a pretty good chance of getting murdered if they tried. So only the Voting Rights Act of 65 cured that. But on the other hand, during that time, we elected a string of good presidents. We survived the Depression. We defeated Hitler and Tojo. We formed NATO. We rescued Western Europe with the Marshall Plan. Americans of all colors rallied to Dr. King and his allies and ended segregation and gave Black people a vote back. And so I see, once we put the American people back in the driver's seat, I think the good common sense of the American people will prevail. And I think we're going to be able to solve our problems and go forward to another one of those great periods of history where our country accomplishes important things and is admired around the world. I guess that's the ultimate goal.
Well, once again, I want to say thanks to you, Dan McMillan, for the work you're doing. And people can go head over to savedemocracyinamerica.org to learn the best way to get involved. And what call to action would you want our listeners to take?
Again, I think the best thing you can do at this point is to go to our website. And if what we say makes sense, just tell as many people as possible. Because anyone who knows you and trusts you and respects you, again, my message is just so much more powerful coming from you than it is from me. Because again, people in our audience, I hope that people can see that I'm sincere and my intentions are good and I make my best case, but people in the audience don't know me. But, to everyone in the audience, I say, you got all kinds of people who know you and trust you. And if you have the time to check out our website and you like what we're doing and are willing to spread the word and put in a good word for us, I think you can make a difference. Don't think you can't have an impact, because you can.
I want to say thanks again to Dan McMillan for taking your time talking to us today, and appreciate all the things you're doing. And hopefully you won't just see the support, but you will hopefully see the momentum shift to really get this going for all people in America, because I think what you're doing encourages transparency and it really allows everyone to be on the same page.
I thank you so much, Shemaiah. I really appreciate your good words of support, and I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to present this idea to our fellow Americans. I thank you very much.